Hey everyone, welcome back. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Haifeng. And as you can see, I am joined by Professor Mohammad Marandi in Iran right now. How's it going, Professor Marandi? Great to be back with you.
Hi, Danny. It's great being with you and your excellent audience, and it's always a pleasure.
Pleasure is mine, Professor Marandi. Everyone hit that like button as you come on. That helps boost the show in YouTube's algorithm. So, Professor Marandi, first, I wanted to get your reaction. Right now, there are a number of developments, and I'll pull them up on the screen after I ask you about them. Iran has launched drills in the Strait of Hormuz in an apparent message to the United States, which Trump has declared another aircraft carrier is on its way, the USS Gerald Ford. Now, according to media reports, Trump has approved of an Israeli strike on Iran on its missile sites. I just wanted your reaction on all of this because there's been a number of escalations, so called talks happening on Oman. What is your assessment of the situation right now? And is Iran preparing for the worst here?
Yes, the United States is using all of its bases in the region, in the Persian Gulf. The countries, the tiny Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, all of them are allowing the Americans to use their bases to prepare for war, even though they may not like war. They don't want war because many of them know they may no longer be in power after a war, but they are obedient to the United States, whether it's Qatar or the Emirates or whether it's Bahrain or Kuwait. It doesn't matter. They're all uh, doing the bidding of the United States as they've always been doing. They may not like each other, but they always do the bidding of the United States, whether it's in the Persian Gulf region, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in the Horn of Africa, whether it's this country or that, it doesn't matter. They're all with the Americans, and the U.S. is using bases and its bases in Turkey. It's using its bases in Saudi Arabia. It's building up its naval presence, and of course, the Iranians are preparing themselves as well. And as you rightly pointed out, the Iranians have carried out a naval drill in the Persian Gulf region, and the Iranian defense capabilities and offensive capabilities are being enhanced as we speak for uh, war in case that happens. No one really knows if there will be war or not, but the Iranians are planning for war. There's no other sensible way of dealing with the current situation, especially since the talks don't seem to be uh, they don't seem to show any major sign of success. We did see a shift earlier when the Americans were demanding that Iran negotiate its missile defense program, its regional alliances, its support for Hamas and Hezbollah and Ansarullah and the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces. And Iran said no. And the Americans were forced to back down. The Americans wanted the talks to be in Turkey, a NATO ally. Iran said no, it has to be in Oman like they were before, in indirect talks. The Americans backed down on all fronts and agreed just to talk about the nuclear program, but that doesn't mean we're going to have a deal. Uh, so we are where we were before the United States and the Israeli regime conspired against the Iranian people and carried out a blitzkrieg attack, and with indirect talks in Oman, and now we're going to have indirect talks again tomorrow. But again, it will be at the Omani embassy, and so the Omani government will still be the mediators.
Mm. Yeah, Professor Morandi, I wanted to ask you about the fact that this feels like a repeat of the summertime. There's a massive buildup militarily of the United States. Israel is now almost seemingly going out front and getting so-called approval for a strike. And I'm just wondering if you believe Iran is ready this time around. They're making pretty strong warnings to the United States that their aircraft carriers are vulnerable, that Israel is very vulnerable to Iran's next strike. What do you make of this? Because it appears that without the surprise factor, there's a lot of the same buildup that we saw in 2025 of the summer.
Yes, it's the same, and that's one reason why the Iranians insisted that the talks be held in Oman, because they wanted to remind the world what happened last time. They wanted people to know that, we're negotiating just like we did right before the Americans attacked Iran. And during those talks, we had 5 rounds of talks, and the U.S. kept moving the goalposts. During the first round, actually, Witkoff said that nuclear enrichment is okay as long as it's for um, for nuclear power plants. And then he shifted the goalposts and again kept doing that. And then between round 5 and 6, the United States and the Israeli regime attacked. So the Iranians insisted that the talks be there, both because the Omanis have behaved more professionally and at least tried to show a facade of independence, unlike Turkey and Qatar and Egypt and the others who are basically a part of the U.S. camp. In fact, Al Jazeera, while the Americans were insisting the talks be in Turkey, it was saying that Turkey and Egypt and Qatar had a proposal where Iran would limit its support for its allies and limit its missile capabilities and limit its nuclear products. It was, the Al Jazeera report, I thought was very disgraceful. I mean, it was disgraceful for those countries that any country that would put such a proposal forward. But then again, we don't expect anything from any of these countries, and these are the countries that supported the U.S. dirty war in Syria. Now we're seeing that the Syrian government is completely obedient to Washington. They supported the dirty war in Libya. We see the misery of the Libyan people continue. And so the Iranians basically insisted that it be in Oman because they just wanted to show, A, that it has to be in a place which is neutral. Oman has behaved in that way. And B, it wanted to remind the international community what the United States did last time round. But the Iranians also wanted to negotiate for 2 reasons. One is because if, for whatever reason, Trump behaves reasonably and agrees to something that is acceptable to Iran, then the negotiations will obviously bear fruit. So that's not impossible, though implausible. And that would mean that the United States would agree to Iran enriching uranium and a deal like 2015, the JCPOA, but of course an improved deal because Iran gave too many concessions back then, and also Iran has made many technological advances that have to be recognized under sanctions, so it has to be recognized. But in any case, that is one reason. The second reason is that if the talks fail, and for whatever reason the United States or the Israeli regime, these 2 Epstein regimes, if they decide to attack Iran, that Iran could tell the international community that, look, we wanted peace. We were open to peace, just like last time round. But the Epstein regime in Washington decided to do something different. So I think it's smart for Iran. Sometimes some people complain and say, why is the foreign minister saying this? That's what diplomats do. It's their responsibility to show that Iran is willing to do a deal. Because remember, at the end of the day, if there is war, it is going to be catastrophic for the international community. So people in India whose lives will be devastated by the price of oil going and gas going through the roof, they need to know that it was the United States that did this. If the Iranians refuse to negotiate, then the Americans will claim that, well, they wanted to have a deal, but the Iranians were unwilling to talk. So as life goes downhill for Indians and people across the global south, the Iranians want each and every one to know that the Israelis sacrificed you, that Trump sacrificed you, that the Epstein class sacrificed to. And so I think negotiations are necessary. And of course, as I said earlier, if Trump decides that he wants to be serious at the negotiating table, Iran will give him that opportunity.
Those are very good points, Professor Marandi. And I think what's interesting to note is I'm wondering if you believe that right now you can sense, I'm kind of sensing this too, is you said that it would be catastrophic for the international community. Let's just say the world in this sense. And I believe that there is, while the US empire generally doesn't care about the world, Israel doesn't care about the world, they do care about how the world affects them. And I do notice just in the way that the Trump administration is talking about this right now, while it could all be deceit, of course, here we even have the Trump administration and the Western mainstream media. They do appear to be hedging really hard toward these negotiations in many respects, and saying that Iran is willing to make all these deals, right? They're willing to make all these deals. But one thing they don't mention ever is that Iran's primary core demand is the end of sanctions or massive sanctions relief. And so I wonder if you could comment on this because there is, I think, more of a tendency of the Western mainstream media to frame Iran as being weak and battered and having been militarily beaten down in the June 12-day war, without any acknowledgement that a big reason it seems that Trump is trying to hold on to these negotiations is because there are massive consequences that will come because of any kind of U.S. strike. What do you make of that?
Well, again, you know, the Epstein class media is the media that hid the ongoing genocide from people for well over 2 years. And they were apologists for the Israeli regime. They were supporting it. So they have no credibility. No one should take anything from the BBC or Sky News or Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or the New York Times or the Guardian or Breitbart seriously. They're all one and the same. They all belong to the same class of people. One may be a bit more sophisticated, and one may be bombastic, but they're all the same. There's no real difference between any of them at all. But Iranians did say and will continue to say that, look, we're willing to allow Americans to invest in Iran because first of all, if the United States removes sanctions, then Iran has no problems with the United States as a country. So we've already gone down that road before. In fact, after the United States supported Saddam Hussein against Iran and the West gave Saddam chemical weapons to use against his own people and against Iran, after the war came to an end, the Iranians offered a major oil field in the Persian Gulf to Conoco, which was a US oil company back then. And they negotiated for 2 years. And then when they were about to sign the deal, the Americans imposed sanctions on Iran because the Zionists, the Epstein class, they didn't want this to happen. But the Iranians were doing that as a sign that they're willing to cooperate with the United States, contrary to what the United States always tries to claim. It's always been the Iranians who try to resolve the issues, but the United States simply won't have it because the United States demands that Iran behave like other countries, and Iran is not going to do that. Iran is not going to give up its sovereignty. It's not going to give up its support for the Palestinian people or the Cuban people or the Venezuelan people. So because of that, the United States be you know constantly attacks Iran. But what Iran is doing now is it's saying, look, we're willing to put all these things on the table. But at the end of the day, if the United States doesn't remove the sanctions, if the United States does not recognize Iran's nuclear rights, and of course everything else is off the table. The Iranians said they're not talking about their regional alliances or anything like that. It's truly amazing that countries in the region, I mean, the Emirates and those who are hostile to the Palestinian resistance aside, those who pretend to support the Palestinian, like Qatar and Turkey, they will do nothing for them. I mean, they'll give scholarships to a few people just for public diplomacy and to have a good name, have people think that they support the Palestinian cause, but they do nothing. And now the demand is for, I mean, one of the demands that Iran rejected is for Iran to stop supporting Hamas. And then, according to Al Jazeera, the Turks and the Turkish government, of course, and Qatar and Egypt are saying, yeah, well, to cut your support for these groups. I mean, whose side are they on? It's quite, it's amazing. Whose side are all these people on? And their supporters, those who are funded by Qatar, who have TV stations and websites. I mean, whose side are you on in all this? Where are you? All that decades of sectarianism that you've promoted, and what have you achieved except for enhancing the interests of the empire? What have you done for Palestine? Nothing. It's only been Iran and the axis of resistance, and all these entities have done is they've tried to discredit the axis of resistance, assist the empire. But what positive role have they ever played anywhere? Where are they now? Right now, as the Israeli regime is trying to take over West Asia, they're too cowardly to take a stance, and they insist that Iran cut its support for the resistance, not just the Shia resistance, the Sunni resistance. It's quite amazing. But I mean, I said this once before in the show. Everyone has been exposed. Everyone has been exposed. And I think if we go back to the history of the last 47 years since the revolution in Iran, we now know why certain countries have been trying to export sectarianism. It has been to assist the empire in preventing from the axis of resistance from growing, and for positive change to be made in the region, because they're subordinate to the West. And they've trained young people for generation after generation to hate who? The resistance, rather than the occupation. It's quite stunning. And even today, they still try to desperately to find some way to justify their position, their useless and worthless position. But in any case, we don't need them. But in any case, the Iranians are willing to put everything on the table, but it depends on the United States. At the end of the day, the U.S. has to recognize Iran's sovereignty, and the United States is going to have to remove sanctions. But then the United States cannot expect that for Iran to stop supporting the Palestinian people. That's just out of the question.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to ask you about Israel here, Professor Marandi, because as you know, Netanyahu has doubled down on his apparently almost like demands, or should we say requests, of Donald Trump. Not only was he supposedly in a report, of course these are officials, we don't know exactly what happened, but not only was he given a green light to launch any kind of attack on Iran, but it appears that Netanyahu, on those same demands that you just listed there, Professor Marandi, stop supporting the axis of resistance, get rid of all your missiles, and of course, stop all nuclear enrichment. It seems that there's a doubling down, and now Israel's out front as the attack dog for a potential strike on Iran. And I'm curious, Professor Marandi, how do you view this from the standpoint of Israel? Because it appears, and what it seems like is happening, is that you have Israel still striking Gaza, still striking Lebanon. Apparently, can't really maintain any level of control or influence unless it is doing this. And yet it is trying to speed up a conflict with Iran. I mean, does this go well for Israel? Is this all part of a master plan that is likely to succeed, or is something else happening?
Well, the Israeli and American regimes are one and the same. And if there are any differences between Netanyahu and uh, Trump, which I have no idea if there are any or not, at the end of the day, it's Zionism. It's, again, the Epstein class that's in charge, whether in Tel Aviv or in Washington. It's, this is it's an Epstein regime in Washington. And so uh, the interests of the Israeli regime is prioritized over the interests of the American people, over the interests of everyone else in the world. So when Netanyahu says that these conditions must be met. None of those conditions are acceptable to Iran. That means that ultimately he is pushing for war. Now, whether the U.S. starts the war or he starts the war, it doesn't make a difference. The Iranians will strike back very hard, and the aggressor will be severely punished. In the case of the United States, the Iranians have already promised that this will be a regional war. All of Iran's allies will be a part of the war. And Yemen has already defeated the United States in their 7-week war. And in Iraq now, we saw that after the elections, Iran's allies have won. And the resistance in Iraq, which is very powerful, can do serious, serious damage to U.S. interests across the board. And then, of course, Iran's capabilities, which are directed towards the Israeli regime, are much smaller than its capabilities directed towards the United States. I discussed this before. Iran's long-range missiles are it can strike Israel, and that's how they defeated Israel during the 12-day war. They can hit the Mediterranean and the occupied Palestinian territory with those missiles. But most overwhelmingly, Iran's firepower, medium range missiles, short range missiles, drones, surface to sea missiles, air to sea missiles, all of Iran's firepower, the overwhelming majority of it is directed towards the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean and the other side of the Persian Gulf. Why? Because in 2002 and 3, the United States invaded Afghanistan and Iraq. Bush started saying all options are on the table. Then Obama said the same. Iran was the axis of evil, according to Bush. And so the Iranians began preparing themselves. So they have all these underground bases. They have a navy that's made for asymmetrical warfare with underwater drones, all sorts of ships with missiles and capabilities to destroy anything in the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. So I think that it's very clear that if there's war, it will be catastrophic for the United States. It will be catastrophic for the world. So it's not just Iran; it's the whole entire region. It will go from the Caucasus to the Red Sea. There will be no more oil and gas. And those Arab countries in the Persian Gulf region, these dictatorships, family dictatorships, they have American bases, which, as I said earlier, as we speak, they're being used to prepare for war. So they have no reason to complain at all if they are hit. And when they have no oil and gas to export anymore, these are tiny regimes where the foreign population is far outnumbers the local population. In Qatar, they're like 350, 400,000 people, passport holders, millions of foreigners. Same in the Emirates. It won't be good for any of them. So the smart thing would be for them to tell the Americans to leave, but they're just proxies. So we are where we are. No one knows what will happen, but the Zionists, the Epstein class, they are pushing for war. But I'm sure there are people in the Pentagon who are saying this is a very bad idea. I'm sure there are. They're not all idiots. They're not all fools. But we'll have to see which way, who has the upper hand. Trump is surrounded by Israel firsters. The Senate, the House, Israel firsters. We'll have to see. I don't want to make any predictions. It's not for me to do so. I have an opinion on all this, but I don't think it's relevant. But the Iranians are preparing for war. That's the only smart thing to do. If you want to prevent war, you have to prepare for war.
Yeah.
But remember, Danny, and all your viewers should remember, this is all about Palestine. This is all about Iran's position on genocide. It is the axis of resistance versus the Epstein axis. And there's no middle ground. There's no middle ground.
No. Yeah, so true, President Marandi. And I wanted to pull this up, given what you were saying about the regional countries. Let's just take Bahrain, for example. I don't know if you saw But they had some choice words for Iran. They said that if Iran attacks U.S. bases on its soil, it would not remain silent. And then somebody had the audacity to publish Bahrain, the size of Bahrain versus Iran on the map. And that underscores the point, I think, though, Professor Marty. It's not just the size, it's also the fact that Iran has seemingly, at least reportedly, thousands of short range missiles, which can hit every single one of these
Hundreds of
countries.
thousands.
All of
Iran
these
has,
countries, right?
yeah, Iran has tens of thousands of long range missiles and hundreds of thousands of medium range and short range missiles. So, I mean, the Bahraini regime would not last more than a few hours.
Right.
And the first to the first to escape to his palaces and in California or and elsewhere would be the family dictatorship. So no one in Iran takes that seriously.
Well, I wanted to underscore something for Sarandi. I don't know if you follow the likes of the Atlantic Council, but I wanted to ask another question about the role of Israel here, because people like John Kiriakou, CIA whistleblower, have said that Mossad and Israel, they are very much inside of the United States government, and as you said, these two regimes are one and the same, as you say, Epstein regime. Very, I think we should normalize that. Now, this is a huge, I think, indication of this. So this is from the Atlantic Council. This is NATO essentially, and NATO
And if I'm
public.
not mistaken, the owner, I mean, they are also very closely associated with Epstein.
Yeah, and you will see just how closely associated they are with Israel here, because they published this piece in the Atlantic Council, 6 reasons why Trump should choose the military option in Iran, and you can probably outline these better than they can. Talking about how it's so moralistic, you got to come to the rescue of Iranians. You have to shape the Middle East, right? Make sure you're credible, right? The U.S. always has to attack when they say they're going to attack. Make sure that you isolate China, make sure that the United States is dictating terms for Iran and, of course, the nuclear program. But look who wrote this, Professor Marandi. He's from the Israeli security establishment itself, whatever that means. Michael Rosenblatt. So this is how embedded Israel is, Professor Marandi, in the architecture. NATO is the United States, after all. So your comments on this? There are these set of demands that just keep on getting repeated and rinsed through the Trump administration, through Israel, and now through, of course, its many think tanks.
Well, there's really no difference between opponents of Trump and supporters of Trump when it comes to the empire. They're both the same. They're all the same. In the political regime, everyone is the same in this Epstein regime. So again, as I said earlier, the tone may be more sophisticated, but you'll see the most hardcore supporters of Trump support policies of war. There was a consensus over the dirty war in Syria, consensus on Libya. No one opposed the war against Venezuela. Even those who pretended to be against war in Venezuela, they say, Maduro is evil, the regime is evil, but let's not do this. That is support for war. That is because that uh, sort of legitimizes or gives this aura of legitimacy, saying that you can do it, it's acceptable, they're evil, but don't do it. But in reality, those who they're the ones who are evil, the ones who I mean, Maduro is the president of Venezuela, and those who say that he's evil and give any sort of justification for war, they're the evil ones. They're the cowards who they want to remain in the mainstream but pretend that they're against war. That's basically who they are. And we have the same when it comes to Iran. They're no different from the neocons. In fact, they're probably worse because the neocons are at least they're open in their evilness. but these people pretend not to be evil, but they're just as evil. So this is they all agree, but it's not going to work. Iran is determined uh, to safeguard its sovereignty and to pursue its foreign policy. And its foreign policy is supportive of the Palestinian people. Even though, again, the Qataris and Erdogan and others have been trying desperately to turn Palestinians against Iranians. They always do that through crude sectarianism. And people who lack self-confidence promote sectarianism. But that doesn't deter Iran, even if it does have an impact on the Palestinian population, because it's an issue of justice. It doesn't matter if if everyone likes you or not. Just like in a different way, in Cuba. Cuba is a communist country, but they're the victim, so Iran will support them. Or in the case of Venezuela, they like Iran. People are religious, and it's much better than Cuba in my opinion, in that respect. But Iran will support it. So, in the case of Venezuela, an excellent relationship always existed. But in the case of, in other cases, Iran will support who they seem to deem as the victim. Again, this is an ongoing war between the Epstein regime and the Iranians. And the axis of resistance. The Epstein class or the Epstein axis and the axis of resistance. It's very simple. And anyone who wants to see it any other way, they're fooling themselves. This is what it's all about. The riots and the murder that the foreign intelligence agencies carried out in Iran, that was to support the Israeli regime. And the Western media that lied about it and tried to say that the Iranian government slaughtered innocent protesters, they do it in order to help the Israeli regime. They do it because they belong to the Epstein class. They have no credibility. What happened in Iran in January, it's clear as day what happened. The U.S. Secretary of Treasury gloated about bringing down the currency to bring people to the streets. The former head of the CIA said that Mossad was on the ground. Then later on, I think on channel 13 or 15 of Israel, he went and said the CIA was on the ground, Pompeo. And of course, Israeli Mossad, they took credit for being on the ground. Then channel 14 in Israel said that foreign governments brought in weapons to kill hundreds of Iranian security officials and police officers. They take credit for it. The footage shows it. They burned people alive. They slaughtered people. They killed many police officers. They burned buildings, banks, ambulances. But Western media collectively, from The Guardian to Fox News, they all say the same thing because it's the Epstein regime, and that's Epstein class media. Mm. All of this is about Palestine. All of this is about ethno-supremacism in the region. So as I said, there's a war going on. It's an ongoing war. It's been going on for many years, but it's reached this high point during the last couple of years. It is the empire versus the axis of resistance. And those who try to discredit the axis of resistance in this region, they belong to them.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm wondering, Professor Marandi, with the United States positioning about 1/3 of its navy now in the Middle East as it continues to threaten a strike on Iran, do you see, given what happened to the riots, given what happened to these proxies of the U.S. and Israel, earlier in late 2025, early 2026? Do you see any possibility of a renewed kind of attempt to sow internal division? We know Elon Musk sent 6,000 plus Starlinks through the U.S. government now. That's now being openly reported in Western mainstream media. Do you see where would that be? Because we even have news of Iran, for example, stocking up on certain kinds of helicopters, which would only be good. Russian helicopters would only be good for internal situations. Do you see any kind of situation brewing internally that would support the United States and Israel in their attacks?
No, those helicopters are of course would be used. I mean, I don't want to comment on military affairs, but helicopters are with Russian helicopters. Those Russian helicopters are very good for drones. So, because you know that during the last 4 years in the war in Ukraine, the two sides have been using drones a great deal, and of course, Iranian drones are a part of Russia's arsenal. But in order to defend itself, the Russians have, over the past 4 years, learned how to deal with its enemy, and one of those is using helicopters to down drones. So there are many. The Iranians are preparing themselves in many ways for war. They're preparing, their air defenses. They're preparing for drone attacks. They're preparing offensive capabilities. As I told you before, they have huge higher firepower directed towards the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean that far outweighs what what they've been able to fire at occupied Palestine. And of course, Iran's allies are preparing as well. You can be sure that Yemen today is far more technologically capable of carrying out attacks. And we saw recently an underground base in Iraq unveiled, belonging to the resistance, a missile base. So a lot of things will happen next time round if there's a war. So, but with regards to unrest in this in these riots and these terror attacks, 3,117 people were killed, and that's the number. There's no other number. Anything else is just disinformation by Western media that wants to support regime change. And as I said, there's no difference between Fox News and the Guardian. They're all the same. They're all fc fast controlled. But those riots really uh, changed the face of Iranian politics. Everyone in Iran is now much more united than before. Everyone is condemning what these rioters did, and we saw the millions of people go to the streets on January the 9th and 10th, when we saw the riots. On January the 12th, as you recall, Iranians went to the streets in the millions. 3 million in Tehran and tens and across the country. And the West tried to deny it. They tried to pretend it was AI. So
Yes.
again, last week on February the 11th, the Iranians said, okay, we're going to do this again. And they asked people to come to the streets, and they invited a lot of international observers, and they were even larger than last time around. So 4 million people came to the streets, and lots of people couldn't make it. A lot, family members with their children, their infants, and people at work working in. That's huge. And the footage is there for everyone to see in Tehran and across the country. So you have a united Iran. Of course, the American, and one reason why the Iranians will not accept a token attack, because what Trump wanted to do was to have, he asked the Iranians to allow the United States to carry out some token strike on some empty building or something. And then the Iranians, I don't know the details, but the Iranians may carry out like some token response, and then they'd end it. The Iranians said no. Why? Because for two reasons. One is that any attack is an act of war. But the second reason is that Iran does not want to normalize U.S. aggression. So 6 months from now, the Americans could stage something somewhere, and then again bring troops or carry out some sort of false flag operation in some part of the world. After all, it's the Epstein class, so they have control over lots of places, and then again threaten Iran and do the same thing. So Iran said, no, we're not going to have the United States being able to threaten the country every few months. So the Iranians said, you attack, whether it's token or it's an all-out attack, for us, it will be a full-scale war, and the response will be overwhelming.
Yeah, and I just want to pull this up. This was from the 47th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution, a celebration that occurred all over the country, and the streets of Tehran in particular were absolutely packed. I believe something like a third of the country participated just in
I
the.
don't even think this is Tehran.
No,
Yes,
yeah,
Tehran was unbelievable. There's
right,
like helicopter footage that just goes on and on and on. It was amazing.
right,
It
yeah,
was amazing. And as I said, every city has its own thing. It's not as if people come to Tehran or some
right,
city for rally. Every city, even like near Tehran, is another city called Karaj, and they have their own thing. So people don't even come from Karaj to Tehran. Quite stunning, but the Western media ignores it.
yeah,
They ignore it because it goes against the narrative, just like they ignore the genocide in Gaza or they try to misrepresent it. No one should be surprised. Anyone who thinks Western mainstream media has any credibility whatsoever, any integrity, they are just being naive.
yeah. Yeah, and I know you love this one, Professor Roddy. One of the retorts to the massive public demonstration of support for the Iranian government and the Iranian Revolution was, wow, look how scared. Every time somebody was interviewed by the Iranian media, look how scared they are. They look like they're scared. They're forced to do this. They're just talking to the people who were picked because everyone is being forced out. They say the same thing about China. They say the same thing about every country where there's a government that or a political process they don't like, and they say, "Oh, all those people that support it, they're all being they're all under the gun. If they don't support the government, then they'll be punished severely." That's the
But
kind of thing.
Danny, there is no country in the world where if people are asked to come to the streets, if they're invited to come to the streets, they'll come out in such numbers. There's no place, and that's despite the sanctions. That's
Right.
despite the hardship that the West has imposed. These people are extraordinary,
Yeah.
and when they fear that the United States is taking advantage of the situation, that's when they actually come in larger numbers. The reason why the numbers this year were so astounding and far greater than previous years is because people felt that they need to come to the streets. And if any Western journalists, I mean, they're not journalists, they're just stenographers for the Epstein class. But when they say these people came, therefore, how can you force millions of people to come to the streets? Like, how do you count them? How do you get their names? How do you assess who came and who didn't come? It's really. And then when you're going to the rally, there are people in their shops like on the way. You're from the other side of the city, and there's shops that are open, there are supermarkets that are open, and so what happens to them? Why isn't anyone in any trouble for doing business as usual while these rallies are taking place? They know this. They all know this. These journalists, these Western elites, they know it, but they don't have a say in any of this. They are agents of empire. So, if after Gaza, if anyone thinks that anything that comes out of the Western media is of any credibility, it's these people are just, I don't know, they just don't want to open their eyes to reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tired Cold War kind of trope of the scary, and not, I guess, back in those times, communist regime. Here, it's just any government that the United States wants to destroy. They're always so powerful that they bring out millions of people to support them out of fear. In the United States, which has the most powerful military, the biggest media, everything, they can't even get a stadium to stand up for the national anthem. I think that's the real curiosity there that people should have is why is that? Is that just because people are more free, or maybe because there might be massive problems in the United States that deserve a little more attention than uh, bombing and destroying and demonizing Iran?
Well, Danny, now that the Epstein files, at least some of them have come out, and the parts that haven't been redacted have opened a very small window into the reality of who runs
Right.
the empire. And and as the US economy goes downhill and as the divide in the United States grows, does Trump really think, or do the people around him really think, that a war with Iran is not going to make things much worse for Americans. But again, that's, for Israeli firsters, the people behind this, the people pushing for this, like in the Atlantic, they don't care about Americans. They don't care about you. They don't care about Indians. I was just telling an Indian friend a while back that the Israelis don't care about Indians. If they bring down the Indian economy and destroy the lives of hundreds of millions of Indians with their stupid, with their criminal war, they'll do it. They wouldn't think for a moment about the consequences for many of those fanatical right wingers that support them, or in India, or or elsewhere. They don't care.
Hmm. Yeah, well, Professor Marandi, I wanted to ask you this. The media, the Turkish media, TRT, they published a statement from an Iranian top general here. And I wanted to ask you if we could play maybe a little game here, if we want to frame it that way. So they warn that Iran's top general warns Trump's new war would be a lesson. So this came from Abdulrahim Mousavi, who said that any U.S. war against Iran would serve as a lesson for Trump. So I'm curious, Professor Morandi, what kind of lesson would a war on Iran serve to the United States, to Israel? This is something that I think has been repeated by Iranian military officials, MPs, etc. And I'm curious if you had any idea of what kind of lessons could actually transpire out of a war with Iran. And I'm guessing these lessons would not be, how should I say, satisfying to the United States.
Well, first of all, I should point out that these all come from the Iranian media. And a lot of Iranian media has English websites, like I think Fars News and Mehr News. A lot of them, the Americans have taken away their .com websites
Right.
because freedom of information, of course, is very important for the West. But Press TV or Tasneem, or there are lots of outlets in Iran now with AI. People can just go to the Persian and just translate a lot of the material. It's not difficult. But yes, I didn't. I saw that report. I didn't read the whole Persian. I don't look at TRT, but I saw the report in Iranian media. But I think it's quite clear that, as I was saying earlier, that the United States has a lot of offensive capabilities. It's a regime that has no problems with massacring and slaughtering. We've seen that in Iraq. We've seen that across the world. We've seen how they starve the Cubans now. I mean, one of the things that should outrage everyone is the starvation of the Cuban people right now. The siege on Cuba. It's like what they did with Syria. In Syria, of course, some of these regime changers who are now very quiet, now that their Al Qaeda government has come to power, they supported the starvation of the Syrian people. Some of these pro Qatari and pro Erdogan and pro NATO and pro Western um, activists, if that's what you could call them. And now in Cuba, I'm hopefully we don't have such a class of people supporting this starvation siege. But the point is that the Americans are good at killing, they're good at starving, they're good at imposing suffering, but the Iranians have a great deal of power, and the country is united. The Iranians have an independent uh, military industry. It has the opportunity of purchasing high quality equipment from the Russians and the Chinese, high tech uh, equipment from the Chinese, and it is located alongside the Persian Gulf. That's why it's called the Persian Gulf. Half of the whole northern side of the Persian Gulf is Iranian, and the key islands in the Persian Gulf are Iranian. So that makes and the Persian Gulf is the most sensitive place in the world because so much oil and gas comes from this region. So if the Americans, if push comes to shove, this is going to be a war of choice for the Americans because they'll be doing it for the Epstein class. They'll be doing it for the Zionist regime. But for the Iranians and for the resistance, it will be a fight for survival. And you've seen the statements from Hamas saying that a war on Iran is a war against the Islamic world, Ansarullah. You've seen Hezbollah. You've seen the resistance in Iraq. And I think a lot of people across the world have similar sentiments. So this is, war is not good for anyone. It will bring about devastation across the world. But this is not a war that the United States can win, and Iran is not going to be intimidated by the United States. It's not going. If they think that by bringing in aircraft carriers and their navy and so on, that Iran is going to be intimidated, it's simply not going to.
Yeah, well, I'm not seeing any sign of intimidation, Professor Marandi. There have been many videos being shared around. I'll just play one that's being shared around is Iranian media channels. Even just, some people are saying just direct threats. I would call them warnings, where there's just a lot of uh, demonstrations happening of what might be some of these lessons that the U.S. learns, which is I think the biggest one is that while the U.S. can bomb countries that have spent trillions and so much money on building this offensive capacity, you can't really defend from thousands of missiles. That's just not really possible. And it's one of the contradictions of encircling a country that has the capacity to hit back. And I think this is a big problem for the United States right now is that all of its wars, Iran being the top war that it hopes to push through and get what it wants out of it. Now it has to face countries that can hit back. It already kind of faced this in Russia with Ukraine. It just so happens that the United States doesn't really have a proxy to fight through anymore. So this is what they have to contend with. They have to contend with Iran directly, and that's something very difficult to justify. Very difficult because it will take a lot of resources. But anyway, back to you,
And I
Professor
just
Marani.
want to remind your viewers that Qatar, which pretends to support the Palestinian cause, and it doesn't. It's an agent of empire. And Al Jazeera, which has good people in it, but it's a tool of the empire. They not only host a major US base, they not only host CENTCOM, but they pay for all their expenses. In other words, as the US is building up its presence in Qatar, the Qatari government is paying for everything. And the US bases in Bahrain and across the region and in Jordan. And sadly, in Turkey, NATO country, Erdogan pretends to have some sort of uh, sympathy or support for the Palestinian people, but he won't dare ever make a move against the Israeli regime. So, this is where things stand. And for those who want to sit on the fence, they can sit on the fence, but they're with empire. That's just basically, they can do what they want, but they're with empire because it's clear as day who's with the Palestinians, who the Palestinians need for support, and who are with Americans. It's very obvious. And sadly, no one in Iran wants war. I don't want war. No one else wants war. But we're not the ones who are going to be making the decision for war.
Right.
Iran has declared a framework that we will not negotiate our sovereignty on any issue. We will not negotiate our allies, our military capabilities, our right to have a peaceful nuclear program, but we're willing to negotiate within the framework of international law to if there's true concern about Iran's nuclear program, which we don't believe is really the case. It never was. It was always an excuse to corner Iran because of Palestine and so on. But if they are really concerned, yes, we can do it because we've done it before. That means that the Iranians do not want war. It's the others. And we saw the US Secretary of State actually gave two speeches that were very interesting recently. One was where he spoke at the Munich Security Conference, where he basically said that we had 500 years of empire, and unfortunately, independence and decolonization weakened us, and now we have to revive the empire. And all those European leaders stood up and gave him a standing ovation. This is the West today. It's as ugly as it gets, as evil as it gets. The U.S. Secretary of State praising 500 years of empires and calling for the revival of empires. And yes, this is it. Everyone should read. All of your viewers should find this and read this part of the speech of his. It's stunning. It says everything really about the West, about these Epstein regimes and the Epstein class. This is it basically. Nothing has changed from the 18th and 19th century in mentality. But the second speech he gave was when he was saying that we have tough negotiations with Iran. Iran has radical Shia clerics, and that makes it difficult to negotiate. And they, theology, because of theology, the Iranians, their Shia religious Muslim Shia identity has something to do with it. It makes the Iranians resilient and makes them steadfast and against oppression, because the Shia are very, for them, supporting the oppressed and standing up to oppression is very central to their beliefs. And that's the story of, the story of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, his sister, and Karbala, and how that resonates for Shias. That is extraordinary, and that's what makes Iran and the axis of resistance very strong. But what do this radical Shia clerics want? Well, first of all, I don't know where this term comes from, because the Speaker of Parliament, he's a professor at the University of Tehran. The chair of the Supreme National Security Council is another professor at the University of Tehran. Actually, he's a professor of Western philosophy, Dr. Larijani. The president of the country is a physician, a surgeon, and a cardiologist. And the armed forces are generals who studied at the equivalent of West Point and so on. So I don't know what these clerics, what he means by that. We know it's like a stereotype to say Iran is like mullahs and all that. But the leader Ayatollah Khamenei is the most senior and high-ranking religious figure who speaks Arabic, speaks Persian, speaks Azeri, and who is fluent in English, and who studied philosophy. He's far more educated than the likes of this U.S. Secretary of State and agent of the Epstein class, and any of his overlords. So, but the issue for Iran is sovereignty. The issue is that Iran is a sovereign country, and Iran is not like other countries that can be pushed to, and forced into towing the line. It's not going to work, and the Americans are going to learn the hard way, and the world will suffer as a result, if there is war, of course. But that doesn't mean Iran wants war. That just means that the Iranians are unwilling to be submissive to this Epstein regime.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the biggest lesson of all, is that the consequences are all going to come as a result of the U.S.'s, should we say, foolish decision to try to accelerate. And I think Marco Rubio's speech is a great example of the one where he talks about the restoration of the West and wanting to restore empire. It really does fit with this attempt to accelerate the the confrontation with Iran at a point where the U.S. empire doesn't really have it doesn't really have what it takes. I mean, if it did, we would have seen a couple of strikes by now, Professor Marandi. I think there's a reason why there's a delay. There's a reason why we are seeing the Trump administration have many second thoughts and reservations, and it's because the consequences are very grim. Even if they do what they do, which is usually kill a lot of people, they already have in Iran, and that's just the reality with those riots. If they do that, if they do more with a military strike, they're going to get hit back in some capacity, if not a very significant capacity. And that's something in my lifetime I've never been able to say the U.S. empire could withstand, and I don't think in anyone's lifetime or before, whoever, before all the generations who are no longer with us, I don't think we could ever say that's something that's the U.S. as this empire of exceptionalism can really handle. It's not really something that it likes to take pride in, or the Epstein class, as you call them, like to put in the history books. And it's hard to spin when in this age of social media, where I don't know if you saw the CENTCOM. There's a CENTCOM spokesperson who was talking about how there's all these randos on social media posting the flight information of the F-35s and the jets and all of this that are coming into the region, and she's calling them randos, but this is just what people do. They share information now. It's all over. You can't get away from it. You can't hide it. You cannot hide, putting 1/3 of your navy right next to a country to wage war. You just can't do it. Anyway, before we move on, any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the U.S. empire, by targeting Iran, it's targeting everyone, and it's targeting the American people, ordinary American people. This is an attempt to create an empire for the Zionist regime, full control of West Asia, and other countries in the region are too weak and too compromised to take a stand. Some are just obedient, like Azerbaijan or the Emirates. The others are obedient, but they know this is bad news for them. But they're just thinking about their palaces, and if they have to go, they'll just go to their palaces in New York and in California, wherever in Europe, or Southeast Asia somewhere in Australia or New Zealand, and then you know that's basically going to be it. That this is in order to create to bring about control over oil and gas resources for the Zionist empire, and of course to eliminate the Palestinian people, and it will continue if they get the upper hand. Obviously, their borders will expand. They will continue with the Greater Israel project. They are a ruthless group of people who will just slaughter children. They are slaughtering kids every day in Palestine and Lebanon, and they'll continue. They'll do it in Jordan. They'll do it in Syria. They'll do it in Lebanon. They'll do it in Egypt. They'll do it in Saudi Arabia, and they'll do it. They'll go all the way to Iraq. That's the plan. That's the Greater Israel project. And if Mr. Erdogan thinks he's going to be able to benefit from this, I mean, that's utterly immoral. But he won't. He will ultimately. Um, the West supports the Zionist empire over everyone else. So there's no competition. So this is the axis of resistance is determined to prevent this evil empire from expanding, and the United States is sacrificing itself and its own people and the well-being of the American people for this entity. So this is a decisive moment in history. And the consequences of war in the Persian Gulf and war between aggression by the United States against Iran will be far greater. The consequences will be far greater than the war in Ukraine. I don't even think they can be compared. So we'll see. I hope there's no war. I hope it does not, there's no devastation for the world. But if the price of gasoline goes through the roof, the price of energy, that means factories will be shut down. That means businesses will be shut down. And that means there will be an economic depression at a time when things are not going well at all.
No.
We know where the global economy is going. We know where the U.S. economy is going, and there will only be one entity to blame. Everyone will know that it will be the Epstein class. It will be the Epstein regimes in Washington and Tel Aviv, and of course, all the Europeans will be complicit as well because they are all clamoring the regimes for war.
Right.
But it will not go well for anyone. But the world will blame them.
Yeah, Europe has certainly been relegated to incredibly infantile cheerleaders as they were doing in Munich and sponsoring all of these ridiculous diaspora, quote unquote, protests against Iran and all these stupid photo ops to show, look how many people oppose Iran when in truth,
Yeah, I
no,
mean,
none of them are
they
in
say
Iran. So
hundreds of
none
thousands of,
of them are in
but
Iran.
they
So it doesn't
inflate
even
the
matter.
number. It's like by 20 to 1, I thought 20 times 20. And then in Iran, they hide the numbers where,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
it's just, it's just, that just shows how ridiculous the West has become.
Yep.
It just shows how ridiculous Western media has become. At least a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, this Epstein class media was more sophisticated. It was, but now it's like Soviet propaganda at its worst.
Professor Martin, I have one last story I wanted to talk to you about here, and that is the expanding on this beyond the region, global implications. I wanted, there's been a lot made of Iran's relationship to Russia and China in the lead up to this, what some are saying, imminent U.S. strike. Who knows at this point? But at the point is that the U.S. is building up, and a lot more has been made of the Iran, Russia, China relationship. And I wanted to, you travel there quite a bit to both countries. I wanted to first just read from Ali Larijani, who gave an interesting interview. I just want to, I'll read it because he is, he's speaking a language I cannot speak.
He's the chair of the Supreme National Security
Yes,
Council. The
yes,
person who I said is a professor at the University of Tehran. He's a professor in Western
right,
philosophy.
right. He is the head of the Security Council here. And I'm just going to play this. I'll read it off what he says. So he says, we noticed that the Russians and Chinese have been very good to us in various political fields. Some are concerned about this because those who stood firmly by Iran and defended it in the Security Council were Russia and China, not Germany and Great Britain. These countries activated the trigger mechanism against us. They are trying to create a rift between us, Russia, and China. I believe Russia and China are working well with Iran because their interests and ours are aligned on some issues. So, Professor Marandi, there's been a lot made of this support that Iran has received from Russia and China, and vice versa. I've covered this, Iran providing support, for example, to Russia, even on the military front and economic front. I wanted to ask you, though, what have you made of reports, not just Larijani's words here? Maybe you can help us get concrete a bit on this support, because in some ways it seems very important. China, for example, has provided even just publicly available satellite imagery, which gives the locations of all of these assets that are being transferred to bases like in Jordan, the THAAD, interceptors, and all of this. So, what do you make of this partnership, and how critical is it for Iran, and maybe even vice versa as the U.S. builds up towards this war?
Well, Iran, Russia, and China have a good relationship, and it's been improving. With Russia, it improved a lot in Syria, where both were fighting ISIS and Al Qaeda together. ISIS and Al Qaeda that was supported by the U.S., Israel, Qatar, and Turkey and Jordan and others. The two military, the two armed forces were working together there, so they got to know each other. And of course, General Soleimani was famous in convincing the Russians to come to Syria to fight ISIS and Al Qaeda. And if the Iranians and the Russians and Hezbollah had not fought during those years, today it would be far worse. I mean, this Al Qaeda and ISIS that we see today in Syria, they're much weaker than what they were in 2013, 14, and 15. And they back then they were about to take Iraq too and Lebanon as well. So that cooperation, despite the fact that Syria fell to Al Qaeda and ISIS, but that cooperation did bear fruit. And after that, after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the Iranians were not blind. They saw exactly what was happening. They saw the Americans and the Europeans carry out a coup in Ukraine. They saw them empower the neo-Nazis, just like ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria and Iraq. And they saw them killing ethnic Russians in the Donbass and in the south as well, in Odessa, burning them alive, as these rioters in Iran do, as ISIS does. Apparently, it's an ongoing tradition with American allies. So, and Iran knew that NATO's expansion was against what they had promised, and if they were also going to expand NATO in Georgia. So, and that would have made NATO, Turkey is of course NATO, and then Georgia, and then probably later on Armenia and Azerbaijan. It was a threat to everyone. So the Iran-Russian relationship improved after the war. And after the 12-day war, the relationship evolved even further. With China, the relationship has also been improving, especially after President Raisi went to China. After Iran joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization under President Raisi, and then BRICS again under President Raisi, and then his trip to China, that the relationship continued to evolve. And President Pezeshkian, his trip to China was a major step in furthering that relationship. And I think after the 12-day war, the relationship grew further because the Chinese and the Russians both recognize that a threat to Iran is a threat to them. The U.S. wants control. These oligarchs want control over the oil in West Asia. That would damage Russia. That would put China in a very bad situation. So Iran is not without friends and allies. These countries recognize that what the West is trying to do. And of course, Iran has regional allies as well, which I explained earlier, the axis of resistance from Iraq and to the Red Sea and so on. So the West is not as nearly as powerful as it says. And the Europeans, they can cheerlead the American war of aggression. We saw the French president, when he was pleading to Trump not to take Greenland, he was saying, look, we destroyed Syria together. We can destroy Iran together, but, don't touch Greenland. That's how immoral and again, the speech of the U.S. Secretary of State, where he praised the empires of 500 years and attacked and decolonization and called for the revival of empires, and the standing ovation that he got from these European leaders, it says it all. It tells us who these people really are and what they stand for. So it's but the Europeans are weak, and they don't have the power that they had before. So Iran purchases weapons from Russia. It purchases weapons and weapon systems and equipment from China. And Iran, of course, helps them out, sells oil to China, sells equipment to Russia as well. The relationship is improving, and Iran's relations with Central Asian countries are very good, and so is Russia and China. So Asia is on the rise, and Iran wants to be a part of that. And of course, the United States does not want to see Asia rise. So the United States wants an ethno-supremacist regime in our part of the world, and it wants global domination for itself. And both are part of the one and the same. The Israelis are the enemies of Russia and China because they are part of the U.S. this imperial project. And of course, the central ideology is, it's not an ideology, but it is the Epstein class. It is they who rule. So whether it's whether it's a Zionist empire in West Asia or a Zionist-led empire, the U.S. empire, it is the Epstein class. And the Russians and the Chinese feel threatened. So the relationship with Iran is growing, and people in our region feel threatened, and people across the world are increasingly feeling threatened by the outrageous behavior of the United States.
Yeah, and how much do you account for this underestimation of Iran? I feel like the closer the US and Israel, and of course all of their hangers on, get to wanting a full scale confrontation with Iran, the more we find out Iran has maybe been underestimated as its own kind of technological power. I mean, we're finding out, for example, in multiple mainstream media reports that Iran has supplied certain kinds of drones to Russia, which have been very useful to them in the Ukraine conflict. We also
Lots of drones going
Yes,
to Russia.
lots of drones. We're talking about in the billions and billions of dollars. That's a lot of money when we're talking about what goes on with the whole currency manipulation, as we've covered on this show, Professor Marandi. And then we're also finding out that, for example, China, of course, we can't question China's the economic juggernaut. China has so much advancements technologically, but Iran, we're finding out 15 years ago or so, we got reports that China in 2011 destroyed the CIA. Basically, they got rid of all of their agents and they essentially eliminated the internal threat. Now we see the United States try to recruit Chinese from the outside to try to turn on their country, but there's a reason they don't have assets there anymore. And one of the reasons is because Iran helped provide intel to China, actually, because Iran had actually uncovered a huge network of CIA spies in their country and had shared that with China. So and shared that how to spot it and what to do, and I think that kind of shows that there is maybe a bit of an underestimation of Iran. And some people saw the surprise attack last year as a huge gap in so many areas. And Iran, like every other country, is not perfect, but I think that there are a lot of areas that have been underestimated that we don't get to really learn about in the West because we're told that Iran is this, evil country that suppresses its own people and, is always threatening the world with its horrible ideology and all the other kinds of propaganda about it.
Yeah, I think U.S. generals and U.S. elites should take heed of what General Soleimani once said. He said, "We are the nation of Imam Hussein." Maybe they should learn a thing or two about Imam Hussein and how that is a a very major part of Iranian culture and society, and how that impacts the way the Iranians have been able to be steadfast and resilient over the last 47 years, and how the Iranians have always been able to take these, support and give support to oppressed peoples from different religious and ethnic and racial backgrounds in different parts of the world. The United States cannot comprehend Iran, the regime in Washington, the Epstein regime, because of its sense of its arrogance and its sense of its you know how it sees itself as superior. I mean, the whole Epstein files, it shows the same thing, the same attitude towards Americans. American girls and children are of no value to them because they are superior. They see themselves as superior. Of course, probably I'm guessing that the reason why a lot of this happens is if you want to be in the club, you have to expose yourself, you have to be vulnerable to others in the club. But the point is that they see these kids, these many thousands of kids,
Yeah.
as of zero value. I don't want to repeat some of the things that I've read over the past few days,
Yeah.
including
It's
a couple of
horrible.
things I read a few hours ago. But it just shows that they have no respect for anyone in their arrogance and their sense of superiority, whether it's the Zionist ideology or just this general sense that since they are the super rich that they are somehow above and beyond the rest. That arrogance is what is destroying their empire, and that arrogance is what will lead them to uh, failure, monumental failure against the axis of resistance, without a doubt.
Mm. Yeah, and, Yeah, I mean about the whole Epstein, the ongoing Epstein saga that continues to both horrify and expose the horrify, masses of people with any ounce of humanity, and of course expose just how crass and abhorrent these elites are and reproducing their rule. Uh,
And it's amazing. What one thing that's amazing to me, it's really amazing, that some of these people who continue to be Trump supporters, I know they've diminished in number, but apparently I can't say the words on because I'm afraid it'll affect your show. But what Epstein has done and what the Epstein class has done, apparently, which was a problem for them a year ago, is not a problem for them now. Shooting a white woman in the face is not a problem apparently.
right.
Uh, Shooting a nurse who was dealing with veterans in the back and killing is not a problem for these people. Mass corruption of the elites, all the things that the MAGA movement apparently stood for. These people really, those who continue to support Trump were not serious about any of them. They just supported this cult of, that is utterly corrupt, that has no principles, and which is falling apart. And this cult, when the price of gasoline goes to the roof, many of these remaining cult members who were unwilling to distance themselves over the child abuse and so on, and the wars that never end, when the price of energy goes through the roof, I'm pretty sure that these will be among the first people who will be seeking out those people who are pushing for the.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all connected, Professor Morandi, and uh, yeah. I mean, I think we see a big reason why these same people who are committing these horrible acts and who are doing so on the basis of whether it's an operation, blackmail, whatever. There's all kinds of theories, but the fact of the matter is that these are people who do control the West. They do seek and pursue dominance and profits at the behest of U.S. empire, and uh, a big reason why Iran, Russia, and China have to be gotten rid of. I wonder if you could comment on this. Is a lot of people make a lot of hay in geopolitics about the military support, right? Radars to Iran from China, air defense systems, all of this, and those are all very important. But I try to stress that economic war is such a big part of all of this, and we've seen even just in recent weeks, Iran, China, with all this pressure on Venezuela. China has increased imports from Iran of its oil. We see all kinds of economic cementation of trading in each other's own currencies. We've seen that between Russia and Iran. We've seen that between all three of them. So maybe you could talk about this. What are some other ways that this partnership assists Iran in particular? Because Iran has been criticized sometimes for not being open enough to Russia and China. I kind of find that to be a little exaggerated, but they say, oh well, they're not accepting all this help that Russia and China can provide, but uh, both of those countries have deep economic partnerships with Iran, and I'm curious if you could help people understand how much of a difference does this make in the ability to defend Iran's sovereignty throughout this crisis and threat of war.
Yeah, I've seen that sort of thing. That's not how it worked, and that's not how it works. It's not as if Iran did not accept this or the Russians. The relationship evolved. It has, as I explained earlier, the relationship with Russia has evolved, and the relationship with China has evolved. It's a two-way street. Russia and China, before 2015, when they were weaker and the Americans wanted sanctions at the UN, they tried to water them down, but at the end of the day, they voted for the sanctions for the different resolutions that were against Iran. Now, the Russians and the Chinese, when the Europeans tried to used the so-called snapback, they rejected it. So the world has changed and the relationship has evolved. So it's not as if Iran did not want this and the Chinese did more. It's both sides gradually, both sides gradually moved closer towards each other. And the same is true with Iran and Russia. So and the US has been the catalyst. So it's not as if like the Russians were offering something to Iran and the Iranians were saying, no, we don't need it. There are all sorts of considerations. Sometimes the Russians had weapon systems that the Iranians did not want because the Iranians did not have the money to buy it. And they thought, well, with the money that we have, it's best instead of spending it on this to spend it on that. Right? So, or the same, or maybe the Chinese in some areas did not want to export certain goods, or the Russians because you often countries are careful about some of their highest technology. The same is true with Iran. But Iran does not export any of its most sophisticated missiles. So there are many considerations, but the relationship between Iran and Russia has improved, and the relationship between Iran and China, and the relationship with Russia and China, they've evolved. And a lot of it is thanks to Trump, and a lot of it is thanks to Obama, and a lot of it is thanks to Biden and the U.S. political and the empire, which constantly threatens countries and constantly cheats countries and constantly lies, and that has been the best and most important catalyst in bringing countries together. That's the United States has been the biggest catalyst in creating BRICS, or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other regional bodies in Latin America and elsewhere. So it's not as if like it was a one-sided affair. It is a evolving process, but I think the relationship between Iran and China is quite good, and the relationship between Iran and Russia is quite good. And Iran is purchasing some of the things that it needs from China, purchasing some of the things that it needs from Russia. And obviously, the Iranian military capabilities, its indigenous capabilities, are very well known. Iranian missiles went right through layer after layer after layer of American defenses, both from the Mediterranean and on land and in the air. And of course, the Israeli defenses, which are American defenses, they're not. Nothing in Israel is indigenous. Everything is from the West and the United States in particular. So again, and it doesn't really have to be this way. I mean, the United States could be a friend of Iran. It could be a friend of Russia. It could be a friend of China. But the mentality of empire and the mentality of the Epstein class doesn't allow it to do so. Otherwise, Americans are like Iranians and like Brazilians and like Russians and like, just who came to Iran recently and was telling me, Rick Sanchez. Rick Sanchez was in Iran. I was in Russia when he came to Iran. Actually, he was going to come earlier, and I told him to come for the anniversary of the revolution to see the gathering. But that caused us not to meet because that's when I
Because you were
was in Moscow
you
for
switched places.
a conference. Yeah, so I was there and he was here. But Rick was telling me a couple of days ago when he returned to Moscow the night before I traveled back to Tehran. He was saying that the thing that struck me the most was just how Iran was a normal country and how Tehran was a normal city and the people were normal and everything was normal. But the West tries to depict everyone as abnormal and themselves to be normal. But when we look at the Epstein files, the most abnormal countries in the world, minus ordinary people, the most abnormal are Western regimes, the Epstein regimes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We could spend hours and hours talking about if we want to compare the political establishments, even just the political establishments. I know how in the United States it works. It's really the economic elites. It's really those who hold the purse strings that
And
actually
then you
control things.
see how leaders and billionaires in our region, in the Persian Gulf and elsewhere, how they are also linked to the
Yes, they
to this
are.
whole Epstein. But ultimately, Danny, Iran the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Axis of Resistance, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, the Iraqi resistance, they are not going to forsake the Palestinian people. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And the American, the political regime is going to have to live with that. Whatever the price, we're not going to relinquish them.
No, no, they won't forsake the Palestinian people. And it seems like there's a whole host of terms that all point to Iran determining its own destiny, whether it's who Iran trades with, whether it's how Iran defends itself. None of those things are up for negotiation, and nor should they be, especially given the fact that it's the United States that has come up to the brink of these strikes now. I guess we could say two times in the last month or so, and when you do that, you're basically ceding and acknowledging that you are looking for war, and there's only two. There's only one other option: you talk or you go to war. And
Yeah, I don't want to see people die. I
no,
saw it, I've seen war before. I've fought in war, and I've seen war, and I've seen the recent war, and how the Israeli regime is ruthless, and how they just bomb apartment blocks, and how they bomb busy squares in Tehran and roundabouts in Tehran. And I know when the Americans attack, they'll slaughter ordinary people, and Western media will call them surgical strikes. And whenever a lot of ordinary people are killed, they'll say the Iranian regime claims. And when some, let's say, senior official, if they bomb his house and kill his entire extended family, they'll ignore that and say that they was a sophisticated, that's how the Western Epstein media works, and that's how Western regimes work. I don't want to see war, but the point is that if the Americans impose it upon us, then we will fight to the finish, and we will make sure that the empire fails, and that will, I think, be the end of the U.S. empire, and definitely the end of Trump's presidency. But no one wants war. But at the end of the day, uh, as General Soleimani said, we are the nation of Imam Hussein, and Americans are not going to get away with aggression.
yeah. Yeah, I think now we can, Professor Marandi, there's been a few good questions here from the audience. I'll have to read them to you since we are using a third-party platform. So I'll read them to you as I pull them up.
You do know, though, it's after 12 p.m. in Tehran right
Oh,
now, so
yes,
then
yes,
you
yes,
get.
yes, yes. No, no, no. Surely we can. I'll
I'm just
just.
afraid I'll be increasingly less coherent, but yes,
No, it's
let's go.
okay. You can answer them as quick as you'd like, and then we can head out of here. We're surely at the end. Um, first question here, quickly. Professor Marandi, your take on India's seizure of three Iranian tankers, as they are saying they were following sanction orders, and if that was true.
I don't have any news. If this is new, I haven't heard. But there was a tanker that the Americans seized in the Indian Ocean, but it had nothing to do with Iran. The Iranians said we don't own it. I don't know about the Indian
Okay.
claims. Is this something new?
I don't know. I haven't followed this. I mean, as you know, Professor Marandi, the United States has been seizing tanker after tanker, saying it's from
Yeah.
this flag or whatever
If
flag.
the United States seriously, if an Iranian tanker is seized, you will see tankers seized, other tankers.
Right.
We've already gone
Already
through that
done
tanker
this. Yeah.
war. Yeah, we're going to be very tough about it.
Totally.
But the Americans took a tanker in the Indian Ocean, said it was Iranian. It wasn't. Have no doubt. If the Americans start taking Iranian tankers with Iranian oil, then you're going to see other tankers taken.
Yeah. And then, Professor Marandi, this question, this person, thank you so much for the generous super chat. Asks, Lindsey Graham came out and said he got BB's permission that the UAE has done everything that Israel has asked for and more, admitting UAE is a proxy agent of Israel. Should BRICS remove UAE?
Well, I think I've expressed my views on all of the countries in the Persian Gulf region and how they're all proxies of the United States, every single one of them, um, on the southern side of the Persian Gulf. But there's no doubt that the Emirati regime is the worst of the worst, and they have done more for the Israeli regime than anyone else, and they've caused so much death and destruction across, in the Horn of Africa and across Africa.
Yeah, Yemen too. Yeah.
This is not sustainable, and it's not for Iran to decide whether they're in BRICS or not, because BRICS is a collective organization. But I'm not so, if there's war, I don't think the regime will last.
Last question for Samrandi. If the attack fails, the U.S. attack, won't Israel and the U.S. try again down the road and so on? We all know what would keep them from striking again. Will Iran ever reverse the fatwa?
Two things. First of all, I think if there's war, I think it will break the empire. I think that the Epstein regime is more vulnerable than people think, and the whole Epstein affair makes it even much more vulnerable than before. So these people have to be very careful.
Totally.
They're, these, they're uh, they're in dangerous waters. But with regards to the fatwa, again, I have to go back to history, and I know I've said this on you. I'm sure I said this before on your show, and a lot of your viewers, I know they're very politically aware, and they probably know. A lot of them know exactly what I'm going to say, and I apologize, but I'm saying it for those who don't. Iran is, in my opinion, the hope for humanity. The axis of resistance is the hope for humanity, and I have, you know, I'm very, uh, this is how I think from the bottom of my heart. When Iran says it doesn't want nuclear weapons, it's serious. The leader is serious. And for those who say, oh, this is just, they're just saying this. We had this in our history. When Saddam Hussein was given chemical weapons, I survived 2 attacks. Those chemical weapons were used against civilians. In one case, they killed 6,500 people in Halabja in minutes. Saddam Hussein in the West didn't care. 6,500 people slaughtered in minutes in the town of Halabja and 2 other small towns, but it was basically Halabja in northern Iraq. I went there soon afterwards, but the bodies were all taken and buried. But I went, all the houses were empty. The doors to the houses were open because the Iranian soldiers went in, and babies were dead, and women in the kitchen just collapsed and died, and fathers at work died, and it was like I didn't see this, but I've seen pictures of it, and people explained to me what happened. Those chemical weapons were given by the West, by this German regime, one of the most sinister regimes of them all. And but when commanders went to and the West prevented Iran from purchasing gas masks and the chemicals that could help like clear up areas where chemical weapons were used. So they'd use chemical weapons, and the whole area would be contaminated, and then you have these chemicals that they use to decontaminate. Iran was prevented from purchasing gas masks and chemicals to decontaminate by the West. This is the world that we live in and live in. This is the Epstein. This is the Epstein class. Iranian commanders went and politicians went to Ayatollah Khomeini, who passed away in 1989, and said, we need to produce chemical weapons. He said, no, that's a bridge too far. And he prevented the country from producing chemical weapons. He said, you have to fight with what you have, find a way, but don't produce chemical weapons. This fatwa is the same. Iran never went to produce nuclear weapons, not before 2003 and not after. The Americans admit after 2003, Iran was not producing or moving to produce nuclear weapons, but they pretend that before that they were. It's not the case. The IAEA has never shown any evidence of it, and they've had intrusive inspections. So Iran does not want nuclear weapons. However, the Dr. Larijani, the chair of the Supreme National Security Council, who you showed on like half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago or so, He did say before he was the chair of the Supreme National Security Council, and so did Dr. Kharozi, who was the former foreign minister and an advisor to the leader. Both of them said that if there's an existential threat against Iran, an existential threat, then Iran will change its nuclear posture. Iran could have made nuclear weapons a long time ago. We've seen Iran's capabilities in the 12-day war. Even though Iran was, there was a blitzkrieg attack and they slaughtered people in their homes and their families and the Western media gloated about it. They didn't care about all the kids and women who were massacred because they're Epstein reporters, they're Epstein class reporters. But Iran beat them back and defeated them because of their sophisticated technology, which is indigenous. The Russians and the Chinese didn't give it to the Iranians. They did it. If Iran wanted nuclear weapons, they could have had it alone. But Iran does not want nuclear weapons to spread because the issue is not just this sinister Zionist regime, this ethno-supremacist Epstein regime in Palestine. All these Arab dictatorships, family dictatorships, and other family dictatorships in the region. Iran has 15 neighbors. So if Iran has a nuclear weapon, then some of these people will want to have nuclear weapons. You're seeing talk of nuclear weapons in Europe now. Now Japan is talking about it. That is, nuclear weapons is a threat to the survival of humanity. So Iran took the moral ground because Iran is morally superior to the West. As a survival of chemical weapons, I tell you, Iran is morally superior. As a person who has seen Iran sacrifice because it says Palestinians are equal human beings, I tell you that Iran is morally superior. So Iran does not want nuclear weapons because it is dangerous for the world. But, as I said before, if there's an existential threat to the nation, we've heard that they've said that Iran's nuclear posture will change. So who is the responsible actor? Who is the moral actor? A lot of people have to start rethinking the world that they live in, especially after watching the Epstein files, the heavily redacted Epstein files, and after seeing who supported ISIS and Al Qaeda, who was in bed together over all these terror groups, who was sincere and really supporting the Palestinian people, who made the sacrifices, and who did nothing when they were needed. Yes, they give scholarships to Palestinians in Qatar and in other places, but that's basically public diplomacy. They've done nothing for the Palestinian people.
Yeah, and we had that dynamic is seen all over the, I guess you could say, the U.S. imperial orbit everywhere. The same dynamic of creating and wreaking the most havoc on the most oppressed peoples, Palestinians. I mean, how in the United States we have.
If people just sat down, I haven't gone through the State Department files, and I know they've withdrawn quite a few, and I know that those files are being kept by others, and they are using AI to make it easy to go through them. I haven't gone through them, but I've seen some of them online, some of them that have been tweeted by credible people, and it's it's sort of like, and the fact that they continue to cover this up, it's like one of those really nasty, horrible movies that you would watch, and it was just so that the antagonist was so evil that you said, well, this, it's not realistic. The movie is not believable. This is what it is now. It has moved beyond the belief. It's so bad that if it was a movie, you wouldn't watch it because you'd say they've taken it.
It's taking it too far, right?
It's fake.
Right.
But it's real. This is the reality that we're living in. And Trump is the person protecting these monsters, and all the people around him are protecting these monsters. And these monsters are all continue to be empowered, and the mainstream media wants you to look away. And that's the mainstream media that is lying about Gaza, lying about Iran, lying about everything. So after seeing the Epstein documents, the very little that we've been allowed to see, thanks to some heroic people, like Massey, and I don't know these people, but you know, at least some people have been courageous and to stand up to this criminal behavior. I don't care about their politics; it's a moral issue. But this little bit that we've seen, I think, has taught us all more than enough about what this empire is really about.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
now I understand why chemical weapons were used on cities and they got away with it.
yeah.
Now everything now makes sense. The genocide in Gaza, all the criminal, the starvation, the siege on Cuba, which no one is talking about in Western media. It makes sense now because these people, they're corrupt to the core, and their journalists are a bunch of stenographers, and all the different channels and the different media outlets use their own different language, but they're all saying the same thing.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, the horrors are so extensive from the U.S. empire, both domestically and abroad, that this channel alone cannot cover them all, and that's how extensive it really is. Hell, no one can really cover everything that was just released in those Epstein files alone, and that's just the tip of the iceberg for what people have to deal with every single day when it comes to all of this. So that narrative, if the U.S. goes to war with Iran, for example, that narrative will just continue. Their dominance over the narrative will continue to erode because we are in the age of the decline of the U.S. empire, in the age of the exposure of these monsters. That's for sure. So, Professor Marandi, we've been here for a while. It's very late for you. I want to thank everybody who came to watch today. Thanks to all who gave super chat, new members. Really appreciate all of you. Hit the like button before you go. Demystifying Iran with Professor Mohammad Marandi on Al Mayadeen is in the video description, the playlist, so you can check out all of his episodes. Professor Marandi, am I forgetting anything you'd like me to put out there?
No, just oppose the empire, oppose war, demand the information from the Epstein files, make sure that everyone has to do their bit to protect humanity.
Yes, very well said. Hit the like button before you go, everyone. That can keep this video boosted.
And hit the like button.
Yeah,
I
hit the
forgot to
like
say.
button. You can never forget that. That's the free way of making sure that Professor Marandi and I's conversation continues to be boosted after the show is over. Well, without further ado, everybody, I will be back later this week. I'll let you know when that is. And until that time, take care. Bye bye.